The metallic scent of blood mingled with the pristine winter air as Ethan Irving threw himself from his horse, his boots crunching through the fresh snow toward the crumpled figure lying motionless near the pine trees. He had heard the shots echo across the valley moments before, sharp cracks that sent birds scattering into the gray December sky, and now he found himself staring down at a young woman whose dark hair spread across the white ground like spilled ink, her face pale as death itself. Blood seeped through her coat, staining the snow crimson beneath her, and without thinking, Ethan pressed his hands firmly against the wound in her side, feeling the warmth of her life slipping away between his fingers. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice rough with urgency as her eyelids fluttered. "Don't you dare give up now." Her eyes opened partially, glazed with pain and shock, the color of honey catching what little light filtered through the clouds. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak gasp, her hand moving involuntarily toward the injury before falling limply back to the snow. Ethan could see the tracks where she had stumbled and fallen, the disturbed snow telling a story of desperation and flight. Further back, perhaps 50 yards away, he spotted what looked like the remains of a small camp, smoke still rising from a kicked-over fire. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though he knew she could not answer. His hands remained firm against her wound, trying to staunch the bleeding that showed no signs of stopping. The cold December wind bit at his exposed skin, and he knew he had to get her somewhere warm soon, or the elements would finish what the bullet had started. Her lips moved again, forming soundless words, and Ethan leaned closer to hear. "3 men," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Took everything." Rage burned hot in Ethan's chest, but he forced it down, focusing instead on the immediate problem of keeping this woman alive. He was 3 miles from Placitas, New Mexico, the small town where he had been heading to deliver a message for his employer. The year was 1884, and while the territory had seen relative peace compared to decades past, outlaws still roamed these mountains, preying on travelers foolish enough to venture alone through the high country. "I am going to lift you onto my horse," Ethan told her, trying to keep his voice steady and calm despite the urgency hammering in his chest. "It is going to hurt, but I need to get you to town. Do you understand?" She managed the smallest nod, her jaw clenching in anticipation of the pain. Ethan removed one hand from her wound long enough to shrug out of his heavy coat, wadding it up and pressing it against her side. "Hold this," he instructed, guiding her trembling hand to maintain pressure. Then, as gently as possible given the circumstances, he slid his arms beneath her shoulders and knees, lifting her from the blood-stained snow. She cried out, a sound of pure agony that cut through him like a knife, but he did not stop. Every second counted now. His horse, a steady sorrel gelding named Copper, stood where he had left him, ears pricked forward with concern. Ethan had trained the animal well, and Copper did not shy away as he approached with his burden. Getting her into the saddle while maintaining pressure on her wound proved nearly impossible alone, but somehow Ethan managed it, settling her in front of him and wrapping one arm around her waist to hold her steady while his other hand pressed his coat against her injury. She slumped back against his chest, barely conscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Stay awake," he urged, nudging Copper into a careful but swift walk. "Tell me your name." For a long moment she did not respond, and Ethan feared she had slipped into unconsciousness. Then faintly, "Rose, Rose Harper." "Well, Rose Harper, I am Ethan Irving, and I promise you, I am not going to let you die on this mountain." He meant every word, though he had no idea why this stranger's survival suddenly felt like the most important thing in his world. Perhaps it was simply his nature to help those in need, a trait his mother had instilled in him before her death 10 years prior. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something he could not yet name. The ride to Placitas felt interminable, though in reality it took less than an hour. Ethan talked to Rose the entire time, refusing to let her drift away into the darkness that seemed to pull at her. He asked her questions, simple things that required only brief answers. Where was she from? She had been traveling from Santa Fe. Where was she going? To meet her brother in Colorado. How old was she? 22, the same age as him. By the time the small cluster of adobe buildings that comprised Placitas came into view, Rose had stopped responding altogether. Panic clawed at Ethan's throat, but he forced it down, urging Copper into a faster pace, despite the treacherous patches of ice hidden beneath the snow. The town looked nearly deserted in the late afternoon gloom, most folks sensibly staying indoors near their fires, but Ethan knew exactly where to go. Dr. Samuel Chin lived and worked in a modest building at the far end of the main street, one of the few Chinese physicians in the territory, and the best doctor Ethan had ever encountered. He had come to New Mexico 15 years earlier during the railroad construction boom and had stayed when he discovered how desperately the isolated communities needed medical care. Ethan had met him 3 years ago when a ranching accident had nearly cost him his left arm, and Dr. Chin's skill had saved both the limb and his life. Ethan did not bother tying Copper to the hitching post, simply dismounting with Rose still cradled against him and kicking hard at the doctor's door. "Dr. Chen, I need help." The door opened almost immediately, revealing a slender man in his 50s with silver threading through his black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that quickly assessed the situation. "Bring her inside, quickly," he said, stepping back to allow Ethan entry into the warm interior. The main room served as both waiting area and examination space, with a large table in the center covered with clean white cloth. "Doctor." Chen gestured toward it, already moving to wash his hands in a basin of water heated on the wood stove. "What happened?" "Gunshot wound to her left side," Ethan reported as he carefully laid Rose on the table. "She was attacked about 3 miles north, been bleeding for over an hour." Dr. Chen moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away Rose's coat and the blood-soaked dress beneath to expose the wound. Ethan turned his eyes away out of respect for her modesty, though he remained close in case the doctor needed assistance. He could hear Dr. Chen's quiet murmurs as he examined the injury, his fingers probing gently. "The bullet went through," Dr. Chen announced after a moment. "That is fortunate, but there is significant damage and blood loss. I will need to clean and suture both entry and exit wounds. You should wait outside." "I am staying," Ethan said firmly. "Doctor." Chen glanced at him, one eyebrow raised but nodded. "Then make yourself useful. Heat more water on the stove and bring me the bottle of whiskey from that cabinet." The next 2 hours tested Ethan's composure in ways that gunfights and cattle drives never had. He held Rose still when Dr. Chen's ministrations caused her to thrash weakly, murmuring reassurances he was not sure she could hear. He fetched supplies and followed instructions, watching as the skilled physician cleaned the wound, applied some kind of poultice that smelled of herbs Ethan could not identify, and carefully stitched the torn flesh back together. "Finally, doctor." Chen stepped back, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. "She is stable for now. The next 24 hours will tell us whether infection sets in. I have done all I can with the physical wound. The rest is up to her body's strength and perhaps some higher power, if you believe in such things." Ethan released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Thank you." "She cannot be moved for several days at minimum," Dr. Chen continued, covering Rose with a warm blanket. "She will need constant care. I have a small recovery room in the back where she can stay." "I will pay for everything," Ethan said immediately. He had some money saved, earnings from his work as a ranch hand, an occasional guide for travelers through the mountain passes. It was meant to help him eventually buy his own piece of land, but that seemed insignificant now. "Doctor," Chen studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You do not know this woman?" "I found her bleeding in the snow. That is all I need to know." Something that might have been approval flickered across the doctor's face. "Very well. Help me move her to the back room, then you should rest yourself. You look half frozen." Together they carried Rose to a small but clean room containing a narrow bed, a chair, and a washstand. Dr. Chen arranged her carefully on the bed, checking her pulse and the bandages one more time before nodding in satisfaction. I will check on her every few hours through the night. You may stay if you wish, but I suggest you at least get something to eat and find proper lodging. I will stay, Ethan said, settling himself into the chair beside the bed. If that is acceptable. Doctor, Chen sighed but did not argue. I will bring you some food. Try not to let her thrash if the fever comes. Call for me if there is any significant change. Alone with Rose, Ethan finally allowed himself to truly look at her. Even pale and injured, there was a delicate beauty to her features, a strength in the set of her jaw that spoke of determination and spirit. Her dark hair, now clean of snow and dried blood thanks to Dr. Chin's careful attention, spread across the white pillow. She looked peaceful despite everything, her breathing steady if somewhat shallow. Ethan found himself wondering about her story. She had said she was traveling to meet her brother in Colorado, but that journey was no small undertaking, especially alone in December. What circumstances had driven her to attempt such a trip? Where was her family? The gold band he had noticed on her left hand suggested she might be married, though it was worn on her index finger rather than her ring finger, which seemed odd. Doctor, Chen returned with a bowl of rice and vegetables, along with a cup of hot tea. Eat, he commanded, and Ethan obeyed, suddenly aware of his own hunger. He had not eaten since dawn, and the warmth of the food helped chase away the lingering cold that had settled deep in his bones during the desperate ride to town. Night fell over Placidus, and still Ethan kept his vigil. True to his word, Dr. Chin checked on Rose regularly, changing her bandages once and spooning small amounts of herbal tea into her mouth, even though she remained unconscious. Around midnight, she began to stir, small movements at first, then more agitated thrashing as fever took hold. Rose, Ethan said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder to keep her from pulling at her stitches. You are safe. You need to rest. Her eyes opened, but they were unfocused, seeing something that was not there. No, she whispered urgently. Please do not. That is all I have. Shh, Ethan soothed, using the damp cloth doctor. Chen had left to wipe her forehead. No one is going to hurt you. You are in Placitas with a doctor. You are safe. She continued to murmur, fragments of pleas and protests that painted a horrifying picture of her attack. The three men she had mentioned had not just robbed her, but had terrorized her, and Ethan felt that earlier rage returning, cold and sharp. When she finally settled back into restless sleep, he made a silent promise that if he ever encountered those men, they would answer for what they had done. Dawn arrived, pale and cold, filtering through the single window of the recovery room. Ethan had dozed intermittently in the chair, jerking awake at every sound Rose made. Dr. Chen appeared with the morning light, looking far more rested than Ethan felt. How is she? The doctor asked, beginning his examination. Fever came in the night, but it seems to have broken about an hour ago, Ethan reported. She was delirious for a while. Dr. Chen checked the wound, nodding with apparent satisfaction. No sign of infection yet, which is encouraging. The fever is expected with this type of trauma. If she wakes today with a clear mind, that will be very good news indeed. And if she does not, then we wait and continue to care for her. The body heals on its own schedule, Mr. Irving. We can only assist the process, not command it. Ethan spent that day, much as he had spent the night, keeping watch over Rose, while Dr. Chen attended to his other duties. A few townspeople came by with various ailments, a child with a cough, an old man needing a tonic for his joints, and each time Ethan heard Dr. Chen's calm, patient voice explaining treatments and offering reassurance. It was late afternoon when Rose's eyes finally opened, clear and aware. She stared at the unfamiliar ceiling for a long moment before her gaze found Ethan, sitting in the same chair where he had maintained his vigil. You, she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. You saved me. I found you, Ethan corrected, rising to pour her some water from the pitcher on the washstand. Dr. Chen did the saving. How do you feel? Like I was shot, she replied, then accepted the cup he offered, drinking carefully. Where am I? Placitas, New Mexico. You have been unconscious for almost a day. Ethan returned to his chair, studying her face for signs of pain or distress. Do you remember what happened? Rose's expression darkened and she looked away. I remember. 3 men attacked my camp at dawn. They took my horse, my supplies, all my money. When I tried to stop them, one of them shot me and left me for dead. Her hand moved to her side, feeling the bandages beneath the nightgown someone, probably Dr. Chen, had dressed her in. I thought I was going to die in that snow. You nearly did if I had been riding a different trail, if I had been even 20 minutes later. Ethan shook his head, not wanting to complete that thought. Can you describe the men? Why? Are you a lawman? No, but there is a sheriff in town. Those men should be brought to justice. Rose laughed, a bitter sound devoid of humor. Justice. In my experience, Mr. Irving, justice is a luxury afforded to those with money and influence. I have neither. You have my word that I will not let this go unanswered, Ethan said firmly. No one deserves what happened to you. She studied him for a long moment, and Ethan had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured and evaluated. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. The leader was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. He wore a brown hat with a rattlesnake band. The other two were younger, brothers, I think, both with red hair and freckles. Ethan committed the descriptions to memory. I will speak with the sheriff, but for now, you should rest. Dr. Chen says you cannot be moved for several days. I cannot afford to stay here, Rose protested, attempting to sit up and immediately gasping in pain. Do not, Ethan commanded, gently but firmly pushing her back down. Dr. Chen said you could tear your stitches, and do not worry about the cost. I have taken care of it. You do not even know me. Why would you do that? It was a fair question, and one Ethan had asked himself repeatedly over the past day. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally. And because no one should face something like this alone. Tears gathered in Rose's eyes, though she blinked them back angrily. I cannot repay you. I am not asking you to. Ethan stood, suddenly feeling awkward in the face of her emotion. I should let Dr. Chen know you are awake. He will want to examine you. He escaped to the main room, where he found the doctor grinding herbs in a mortar. She is awake and lucid, he reported. Good. Very good. Doctor. Chen set aside his work and moved toward the recovery room, then paused. Mr. Irving, you should know that Miss Harper is far from recovered. She will need weeks of rest and careful attention before she is well enough to travel. What are your intentions? My intentions? Will you be staying in Placitas, or do you have other obligations? Ethan had not thought that far ahead. He had been supposed to deliver a message to a rancher near Placitas 2 days ago, but circumstances had obviously delayed that errand. His employer, a ranch owner named Thomas Crawford, whose land lay 30 miles south, would probably be wondering what had happened to him. But the thought of leaving Rose to recover among strangers felt wrong in a way he could not explain. I will stay, he decided, at least until she is well enough to make her own decisions about what comes next. Doctor. Chen nodded, unsurprised. There is a boarding house 2 streets over run by Mrs. Rodriguez. She keeps clean rooms at fair prices. I suggest you acquire one and perhaps a change of clothes. You are beginning to develop a certain unfortunate aroma. Despite everything, Ethan found himself almost smiling. Understood. I will return later this evening to check on Miss Harper. The boarding house proved easy to find, a sturdy adobe structure with a neat garden now dormant for winter. Mrs. Rodriguez was a warm, round woman in her 60s who immediately adopted a maternal attitude toward Ethan, insisting he needed a proper meal and clean clothes before she would even discuss room rates. An hour later, Bathed, fed, and dressed in borrowed clothes while his own were laundered, Ethan felt almost human again. He spent the afternoon speaking with Sheriff Tom Garrett, a weathered man in his 50s who listened to Rose's description of her attackers with a grave expression. Sounds like the Brennan brothers and their associate, a man named Pike, he said, stroking his gray mustache thoughtfully. They have been causing trouble through the territory for months now. Mostly robbery, but this is the first shooting I have heard about. What can be done? Ethan asked. I will send out telegrams to neighboring towns, put out descriptions, and wanted notices. Beyond that, the sheriff shrugged helplessly. These mountains provide 1,000 places to hide, and I am just one man with a deputy who is getting too old for hard riding. If they have any sense, they will have already crossed into Colorado or Arizona. It was not the answer Ethan wanted, but he understood the reality of law enforcement in the sprawling territories. Thank you for trying. How is Miss Harper doing? I heard about her from Dr. Chen. She woke this afternoon. Dr. Chen says she will recover. With time. That is something at least. Tell her if she remembers anything else, anything at all that might help identify these men, to let me know. Ethan promised he would, and returned to Dr. Chen's office as the winter sun set early over the mountains. He found Rose awake and sitting up slightly, propped against pillows, with a bowl of broth on the table beside her bed. She looked better than she had that morning. Some color returned to her cheeks, though she still appeared fragile and worn. You came back, she said as he entered. I said I would. Ethan reclaimed his seat in the chair. I spoke with the sheriff. He thinks he knows who attacked you, men who have been operating in this area for some time. Rose nodded slowly. Will they be caught? The sheriff is doing what he can, but he was honest about the limitations. These men could be anywhere by now. Of course. She picked at the blanket covering her lap. Mr. Irving, I owe you a debt I cannot repay. You have done more for a stranger than anyone has a right to expect. Once I am well enough to travel, I will find work somewhere and repay every cent. Call me Ethan, please. And as I said before, I am not keeping a ledger. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. If you do not mind my asking, why were you traveling alone? You mentioned a brother in Colorado. James, he is the only family I have left. Rose's expression grew distant. Our parents died in a fire 2 years ago in Santa Fe. James had already gone to Colorado to prospect for silver. After Mom and Papa died, I stayed in Santa Fe because I had a position as a seamstress, and I thought I could build a life there. But then the shop closed, and I could not find other work. James wrote saying I should come to him, that there were opportunities in the mining towns. So you set out alone in December? I had no choice. My rent was coming due, and I had no money to pay it. I thought if I was careful, if I rationed my supplies and avoided trouble, I could make it. She laughed bitterly. I was a fool. You were desperate, Ethan corrected. That is different from foolishness. We all do what we must to survive. Rose looked at him with those honey-colored eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Why are you being so kind to me? My mother used to say that we are judged not by how we treat those who can help us, but by how we treat those who need our help. Ethan found himself sharing something he rarely spoke of. She died when I was 12, and the people in our town could have left my father and me to struggle alone. Instead, they helped us, brought food, found work for my father, made sure I could continue my schooling. I never forgot that. When I saw you in the snow, bleeding and alone, how could I do anything else? Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. I think she would have liked you. She always appreciated people who had the courage to fight for what they needed. Over the following days, Ethan fell into a routine. He would arrive at Dr. Chen's office after breakfast, spending most of the day keeping Rose company while she recovered. They talked, sharing stories of their lives, learning about each other in the way that only forced proximity and shared adversity can facilitate. He learned that she loved reading, but had been forced to sell most of her books when money grew tight. She discovered that he had a talent for whittling, creating small wooden figures during the long evenings, and she watched with fascination as his knife shaped rough wood into delicate forms. Dr. Chin declared himself pleased with Rose's progress. The wound was healing cleanly with no signs of infection, and she was growing stronger each day. By the end of the first week, she could sit up without assistance and even stand for brief periods, though the effort clearly exhausted her. Ethan continued to stay at Mrs. Rodriguez's boarding house, but he found himself spending less and less time there. The boarding house keeper noticed, of course, her knowing looks making Ethan uncomfortable, though he did not entirely understand why. He was simply helping someone in need. That was all. Or at least, that was what he told himself. It was during the second week of Rose's recovery that Ethan began to acknowledge, privately, that his feelings had evolved beyond simple compassion. He found himself thinking about her during the rare hours they were apart, wondering if she would like the book he saw in the general store's window or whether the blue ribbon he spotted would match her eyes. He began to notice small details, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the slight dimple that appeared in her left cheek when she truly smiled, the graceful movements of her hands when she gestured while speaking. He was falling in love with her, and the realization terrified him. Ethan had courted a few girls in his 22 years, but nothing serious had ever developed. He had been too focused on work, on building something for his future, to allow himself the distraction of romance. But Rose was no distraction. She was becoming the focal point of everything, and he had no idea what to do about it. The situation grew more complicated when Rose began to recover enough to think about her future. One afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the attack, she broached the subject that Ethan had been dreading. "I need to send a telegram to James," she said, setting aside the book Ethan had brought her the previous day. "He will be worried when I do not arrive as expected." "Of course. I can take you to the telegraph office whenever you feel strong enough for the walk." "Ethan," she said his name in a way that made him look up from the piece of wood he had been carving. "I have been thinking about what I will do when Dr. Chen releases me. You should rest, not worry about such things yet. I cannot stay here forever. I have no money, no possessions except the clothes Dr. Chen managed to salvage from what I was wearing. I need to work to earn enough for passage to Colorado. You could stay in Placitas," Ethan suggested before he could stop himself. "There is a dressmaker here, Mrs. Chen, the doctor's wife. I am sure she could use help, especially someone with your training." Rose tilted her head, studying him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why would you want me to stay?" "Because I cannot imagine waking up knowing you are no longer here. Because somewhere in these past weeks, you have become essential to my happiness. Because I love you." The thoughts crashed through Ethan's mind, but he could not voice them. What right did he have to ask her to change her plans, to stay in a place where she knew no one except him? She had a brother waiting for her, a family connection that surely meant more than the tentative friendship they had built. "I only thought it might be easier than continuing your journey in your condition," he said finally, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. "I see." Rose looked away, and Ethan thought he detected disappointment in her voice, though he could not imagine why she would be disappointed by his response. The conversation left an awkwardness between them that had not existed before, a tension that made Ethan second-guess everything he said or did. He began to wonder if he had overstayed his welcome, if his constant presence had become more burden than comfort. Perhaps it was time to return to the Crawford Ranch, to resume his normal life and allow Rose to continue with hers. But every time he resolved to leave, to put distance between himself and these confusing feelings, he would see her smile at something he said, or she would touch his hand in gratitude, and his resolve would crumble. It was Mrs. Rodriguez who finally intervened, cornering Ethan one evening when he returned to the boarding house later than usual. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to the kitchen table. "We need to talk." Ethan obeyed, watching as she poured 2 cups of coffee and settled herself across from him with the air of someone preparing for serious business. You are in love with her, Mrs. Rodriguez stated, not asking. I do not know what you mean. Do not insult my intelligence, young man. I have been watching young people fall in love for 40 years. You have all the signs. You barely eat. You cannot focus on anything except when you will see her next, and you get this foolish smile on your face whenever anyone mentions her name. Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks. Even if what you are saying is true, it does not matter. She is leaving as soon as she is well enough. She has a brother in Colorado, a whole life waiting for her. Does she know how you feel? No, and I am not going to tell her. What would be the point? She has made her plans, and I have no right to interfere with them. Mrs. Rodriguez made a sound of pure exasperation. Men! I swear, God gave you strength and courage but forgot to include basic common sense. Have you considered that maybe, just maybe, she wants you to interfere? That she might have feelings for you as well? That is impossible. Why? Because you rescued her? Because you have been at her side every day, showing her more kindness and care than she has probably experienced in years. Because she looks at you the same way you look at her when you think no one is watching. Ethan's heart stuttered. She does? For the love of all that is holy, yes, but she is a woman, and a proud one from what I can tell. She will not throw herself at you, especially not when you have done so much for her already. She probably thinks you are simply being kind out of obligation or pity. Mrs. Rodriguez reached across the table and grasped Ethan's hand firmly. If you have any feelings for this girl, you need to tell her before it is too late. Life is too short and too uncertain to let fear keep you from happiness. That night, Ethan lay awake in his rented room, Mrs. Rodriguez's words echoing in his mind. Was it possible that Rose felt something for him beyond gratitude? He replayed their conversations, searching for signs he might have missed, and the more he thought about it, the more he began to see what Mrs. Rodriguez had described. The way Rose's face lit up when he arrived each day, how she seemed to lean toward him when they talked, closing the distance between them. The careful questions she asked about his life, his plans, his dreams, as though she was trying to map out where she might fit. By morning, Ethan had made his decision. He would tell Rose how he felt, and if she did not share his feelings, he would accept that and help her on her way to Colorado without any expectations or demands. But at least he would know, one way or another, and he would not spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. He arrived at Dr. Chin's office with his resolve firm, but when he entered Rose's room and found her standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains beyond town, his carefully prepared speech evaporated. She turned as she heard him enter, and the smile that crossed her face made his breath catch. Ethan, I was just thinking about you. You were? Dr. Chen says I am well enough to leave his care. He wants to move me out of this room tomorrow to free it for other patients who might need it. I sent the telegram to James this morning, letting him know what happened and that I will continue to Colorado as soon as possible. She twisted the gold band on her finger, a nervous gesture Ethan had come to recognize. I want to thank you properly for everything you have done. Without you, I would be dead in that snow. You gave me my life back, and I will never forget that. Rose, I need to tell you something. Ethan moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of green in her honey eyes. These past weeks getting to know you, they have meant more to me than I can properly express. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and He paused, gathering his courage. I have fallen in love with you. Rose's eyes widened, her hand moving to her throat in an unconscious gesture of surprise. Ethan, Please let me finish. I know you have plans, and I know you have obligations to your brother. I am not asking you to give those up or change your life for me. I just needed you to know, before you left, that you have become everything to me. If there is any chance, any possibility, that you might feel something for me as well, I would like to try to build a life with you, here in Placitas, or in Colorado, or anywhere else you want to go. I do not have much, but I am a hard worker, and I would spend every day trying to make you happy. Silence stretched between them, and Ethan's heart sank as he watched conflicting emotions play across Rose's face. He had made a terrible mistake, had misread everything, and now he had ruined even the friendship they had built. Then Rose stepped forward and took his hands in hers, and when she looked up at him, tears streamed down her cheeks. "You fool," she said, but she was smiling. "I have been in love with you since you lifted me from that snow and promised you would not let me die. Every day since then, I have been trying to find the courage to tell you, but I thought you were just being kind because you felt responsible for me. I never imagined you might actually care." Joy exploded through Ethan's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "You love me?" "I love you. But Ethan, I have nothing to offer you. No money, no prospects, no family except James. I am a burden, not a partner." "You are everything I need," Ethan said firmly. And then, because words suddenly seemed insufficient, he cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her. The kiss was soft and careful, mindful of her still healing injury, but it contained all the emotion Ethan had been holding back for weeks. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Rose was laughing and crying at the same time. "We are completely insane," she said. "We have known each other less than a month." "I know. Does it matter?" "Not even a little bit." They talked for hours after that, making plans and discussing logistics with the practical focus of two people who had both known hardship and understood that love alone could not sustain a life together. Ethan explained that he had savings, enough to rent a small house in Placitas and support them while Rose recovered fully. She could work with Mrs. Chen once she was strong enough, building up her own savings. He would return to work at the Crawford Ranch, at least temporarily, to maintain his income. "What about James?" Rose asked. "I should still go to him, at least to explain in person why I am not coming to Colorado permanently." "Then we will go together," Ethan decided. "Once you are completely healed and the weather improves, spring is a better time for that journey anyway. We can make it a trip, see your brother, and then return here to build our life." "You would do that? Travel all the way to Colorado just so I can see my brother?" "Rose, I would travel to the ends of the earth if it made you happy." She kissed him again, longer this time, and Ethan marveled at how his entire world had shifted in the space of a few hours. Dr. Chen, when they informed him of their plans, looked entirely unsurprised. "I told Mr. Irving weeks ago that you would need careful attention during your recovery," he said with the ghost of a smile. "I am pleased he took my advice so seriously. However, Miss Harper, I must insist that you continue to rest and avoid strenuous activity for at least another month. That includes traveling." "We will wait until spring," Ethan assured him. "Rose will stay in Placitas through the winter." "Good. And I assume you will be marrying before living together?" "I only ask because I would hate for either of you to face unnecessary gossip in a town this small." Ethan looked at Rose, finding his own surprise mirrored in her expression. They had been so focused on the revelation of their mutual feelings that neither had thought that far ahead. "I would marry you tomorrow if you would have me," he said honestly. "But I do not want you to feel pressured." "I want to marry you," Rose said softly. "Not because of propriety or pressure, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. So yes, tomorrow or next week or whenever you want." "There is a priest in town who performs marriages," Dr. Chen offered. "Father Miguel, a good man who will not charge an exorbitant fee." And so, on a cold December morning, exactly 1 month after Ethan had found Rose, bleeding in the snow, they were married in a simple ceremony at the small church that served Placitas and the surrounding area. Mrs. Rodriguez stood as witness along with Dr. Chen and his wife Lily, a tiny, graceful woman who had immediately embraced Rose upon meeting her and promised to teach her everything she knew about dressmaking. Rose wore a dress that Lily had altered to fit her, simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Ethan wore his best clothes, freshly laundered and pressed, and when Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan felt as though his heart might burst from happiness. They took up residence in a small adobe house on the edge of town, 2 rooms and a kitchen that felt like a palace to Ethan, who had spent most of his adult life living in ranch bunkhouses. Mrs. Rodriguez donated some spare furniture, and other townspeople, hearing about the young couple and their story, contributed what they could. A table here, a chair there, blankets and dishes, and all the small necessities that transform a house into a home. Rose continued to recover under Dr. Chen's supervision, growing stronger each day. By January, she was well enough to begin helping Lily Chen with her dressmaking business, starting with simple alterations and mending before gradually taking on more complex projects. She discovered that she loved the work, loved the creativity involved in transforming fabric into garments that made people feel beautiful. Ethan returned to his work at the Crawford Ranch, leaving before dawn and returning after sunset. But he never complained about the long hours or the hard labor. He was working towards something now, building a future with Rose, and that made even the most difficult days worthwhile. Thomas Crawford, his employer, proved understanding about the circumstances that had delayed Ethan's original errand and even gave him a small raise when he learned of the marriage. Winter gradually gave way to early spring, and as the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared on the mountains, Ethan and Rose began to prepare for their journey to Colorado. They had saved enough money for supplies and passage, and Rose had received several letters from James, who was anxious to meet the man who had saved his sister's life and won her heart. They departed Placitas on a bright April morning in 1885, riding north with Copper and a sturdy mare that Ethan had purchased for Rose. The journey took 2 weeks, following trails that were muddy with snowmelt but passable, and Rose proved herself an excellent traveling companion, never complaining about the long days in the saddle or the basic campsites where they spent their nights. James Harper lived in a mining town called Silver Creek, a chaotic, bustling place carved into the mountainside where fortunes were made and lost with equal frequency. He was waiting for them at the edge of town, having received Rose's telegram about their expected arrival, and the reunion between siblings was emotional and joyful. James was 25, 3 years older than Rose, with the same dark hair and honey eyes. He embraced his sister fiercely, then turned to Ethan and gripped his hand with genuine warmth. "You saved her life. I can never repay that debt." "She is my wife. Protecting her is not a debt, but a privilege." They spent a week in Silver Creek, and Ethan found himself liking James immensely. The older man had done well for himself, working as a foreman for one of the larger mining operations rather than prospecting independently. He had a solid income and a comfortable home, and he made it clear that Rose and Ethan were welcome to stay permanently if they wished. But as they talked one evening, the three of them sitting around James's table, Rose reached over and took Ethan's hand. "Placitas is our home now. We have built something there, found people who care about us. I will always love you, James, and I want us to stay close. But my life is with Ethan in New Mexico." James smiled, though his eyes were sad. "I understand, and I am happy for you truly. Just promise you will visit regularly and that I can come see you as well." "Always," Rose promised. The journey back to Placitas felt different, lighter somehow, as though the trip had provided necessary closure. Rose no longer carried the weight of obligation to her brother, and Ethan no longer worried about whether she might regret choosing him over her family. They returned to their small adobe house and their life together with renewed commitment and joy. The years that followed were not always easy. Money was sometimes tight, especially in the beginning, and there were challenges that tested them both. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating victories, no matter how small. Rose's dressmaking business flourished under Lily Chen's mentorship, and eventually she took over the shop entirely when Lily decided to retire. Women from surrounding towns would travel to Placitas specifically to commission gowns and dresses from Rose Irving, whose skill and artistry became known throughout the territory. Ethan continued working at the Crawford Ranch for several more years, eventually becoming the foreman when the previous man retired. The position came with better pay and a small house on the ranch property, but Ethan turned down the housing, preferring to maintain their home in Placitas, where Rose's business was established. Instead, he negotiated a salary that reflected the longer commute, and Thomas Crawford, recognizing Ethan's value and dedication, agreed readily. In the fall of 1887, Rose discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and terror in equal measure, suddenly aware of the responsibility they were about to undertake. Dr. Chen, now in his late 50s but still the most skilled physician in the region, assured them that Rose was healthy and strong and that he would personally oversee the birth. Their son was born in May of 1888, a healthy baby boy with Ethan's dark hair and Rose's honey eyes. They named him Samuel after Dr. Chen, whose care and skill had saved Rose's life and made their entire family possible. The doctor, normally reserved and dignified, had tears in his eyes when they told him of the honor. Parenthood transformed them both. Ethan discovered depths of love and protectiveness he had not known he possessed, while Rose proved to be a patient, nurturing mother who somehow managed to balance caring for Samuel with maintaining her dressmaking business. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become like a grandmother to them, helped watch the baby while Rose worked, and the entire town seemed to embrace the small family as their own. In 1890, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine after Ethan's mother. She was a spirited baby, full of energy and curiosity, and she kept both parents constantly alert. Samuel, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his little sister, and the bond between them developed quickly and strongly. James visited regularly, making the trip from Colorado 2 or 3 times a year, and he doted on his niece and nephew with all the enthusiasm of a devoted uncle. On one visit in 1892, he brought news that he had met someone, a widow named Patricia who ran a boarding house in Silver Creek, and he thought he might marry her. Rose was delighted, having worried about her brother's loneliness, and she insisted that the wedding take place in Placitas so that everyone important to them could attend. The wedding was a joyful affair, bringing together the communities that had become family to both James and Rose. Father Miguel performed the ceremony, now considerably older but still sharp-minded and kind. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a feast that seemed to include half the town, and Dr. Chen and Lily danced together with the grace of a couple who had loved each other for decades. As Ethan watched the celebration, Rose beside him with Catherine asleep in her arms, and Samuel playing with other children nearby, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path his life had taken. A chance decision to ride a particular trail on a December morning 5 years earlier had led to this, to a love deeper than he had imagined possible, and a family that filled his days with purpose and joy. "What are you thinking about?" Rose asked softly, leaning against his shoulder. "About how lucky I am. About how one moment, one choice can change everything. You saved my life that day. And you saved mine, though you did not know it at the time. I was just existing before I met you, moving through days without real purpose or passion. You gave me both of those things." He kissed the top of her head gently, careful not to wake Catherine. "I love you more today than I did when we married, and I suspect I will love you even more tomorrow." "You are going to make me cry at your brother's wedding," Rose said, but she was smiling. "Though I love you too, more than words can express." The years continued to pass, bringing changes but also constants. In 1894, Ethan had finally saved enough money to purchase a piece of land just outside Placitas, 20 acres where he could run his own small cattle operation in addition to his work at the Crawford Ranch. They built a larger house on the property, with space for their growing children and a proper workshop where Rose could work on her dressmaking without competing for space with cooking and living areas. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved books and learning. Father Miguel began tutoring him in reading and writing, and there was talk of sending him to a proper school in Santa Fe when he was older. Catherine, meanwhile, was fearless and adventurous, constantly climbing things she should not and exploring every corner of their property with boundless energy. She adored horses and would follow Ethan around the corrals, asking endless questions about the animals. In 1897, Rose gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas after Ethan's employer and friend, who had stood by them through the years and had become like family. Thomas Crawford, now in his 60s and with grown children of his own, was deeply moved by the gesture. Dr. Chen retired in 1899, turning his practice over to a younger physician who had trained back east and was eager to serve the growing communities of the New Mexico territory. The retirement was well earned, and Dr. Chen and Lily spent their remaining years gardening, traveling occasionally to visit relatives in California, and being doting honorary grandparents to the Irving children. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Placitas grew from a small village into a proper town. New families arrived, businesses expanded, and there was even talk of extending the railroad to their area, though that project would take years to complete. Through it all, Ethan and Rose remained central figures in the community, respected and loved for their kindness and integrity. On a December morning in 1900, 16 years after the day that had changed both their lives forever, Ethan and Rose rode out together to the spot where he had found her bleeding in the snow. It had become a tradition of sorts, a private anniversary that they marked each year by visiting the place where their story had begun. The pine trees still stood, taller now but unmistakable, and snow covered the ground just as it had that terrible and miraculous day. They dismounted, tying their horses to a low branch, and stood together, looking at the spot where Rose had nearly died. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had been different?" Rose asked, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "If you had ridden a different trail, or if those men had not attacked me?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "But then I remember that we cannot live in the world of what-ifs. We can only be grateful for the world we have. I am grateful every single day. For you, for our children, for the life we have built together." Rose turned to face him, and even after 16 years of marriage, Ethan still felt his breath catch when she looked at him with those honey eyes. "You told me once on the day you proposed that you would spend every day trying to make me happy. You have done that, and so much more." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Ethan said honestly. "You make me want to be better, do better, reach higher. Everything good in my life flows from the moment I found you here." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, remembering and reflecting until Rose shivered slightly in the cold. "We should get back. Samuel and Catherine will be wondering where we went, and little Thomas has probably gotten into something he should not have." Ethan laughed, helping her mount her horse. "That boy has entirely too much of his sister's adventurous spirit and none of his brother's caution. He gets that from you," Rose teased, as they started the ride back toward town. "Me? I am the very picture of caution and good sense. You rescued a dying stranger, married her after knowing her for less than a month, and have spent 16 years making impulsive, romantic gestures. You are many wonderful things, Ethan Irving, but cautious is not one of them." He could not argue with that assessment, nor did he want to. His impulsive decision to help Rose, to love her, to build a life with her had been the best choice he ever made, and he would not change a single moment of their journey together. As they crested the ridge overlooking Placitas, they could see smoke rising from chimneys throughout the town, families gathered in warm homes against the December cold. Their own house stood on the far edge of the settlement, and Ethan could just make out 3 small figures playing in the yard, supervised by Mrs. Rodriguez, who, despite being well into her 70s, still insisted on helping with the children whenever possible. "Look at what we have built," Rose said softly, following his gaze. "A family, a home, a place in this community. All because of one terrible, wonderful day. The day I found you. The day you saved me," Rose corrected. "In every way, a person can be saved." They rode down the ridge together, side by side as they had ridden through life for 16 years, heading home to the children they loved and the future they would continue building together. The snow crunched beneath their horses' hooves, and the winter sun cast long shadows across the land. But Ethan felt only warmth. The years continued their steady march forward. Samuel, true to Father Miguel's predictions, proved to be a brilliant student and eventually attended university in Santa Fe, studying law with the goal of returning to practice in the growing towns of northern New Mexico. Catherine surprised no one by becoming an accomplished horsewoman who helped Ethan manage their expanding cattle operation, showing no interest in the traditional domestic pursuits that many expected of young women. Thomas, their youngest, turned out to have inherited his mother's artistic talent, though his medium was woodworking rather than fabric. By the time he was 12, his carved pieces were selling in the general store, and people came from neighboring towns to commission his work. In 1908, when Samuel was 20 years old, he returned from university with a law degree and immediately set about establishing a practice in Placitas. The town had grown large enough to support such services, and Samuel's intelligence and integrity quickly earned him respect throughout the region. 2 years later, he married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and in 1911, Ethan and Rose became grandparents for the first time when Samuel and Elizabeth's daughter was born. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Ethan was overwhelmed by the realization of how far his life had come from those early days as an orphaned ranch hand with few prospects. This child represented the future, a continuation of the love story that had begun in blood and snow and had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. Catherine, defying social expectations and her parents' occasional concerns, waited until she was 25 to marry, finally finding her match in a railroad engineer named Michael Grant, who appreciated her independence and spirit. Their wedding in 1903 was a grand affair, and they settled in Placitas, where Michael helped oversee the newly completed railroad extension while Catherine continued to manage the Irving family's cattle operation with her father. Thomas, the artistic one, fell in love with the daughter of the town's blacksmith when he was 18. Rebecca shared his creative sensibility, being a talented painter, and they were married in a quiet ceremony in 1906. Together they opened a shop that sold both functional and decorative items, from Thomas's carved furniture to Rebecca's painted signs and artwork, and the business thrived. As each of their children married and started families of their own, Ethan and Rose found themselves at the center of a growing clan that included not just their biological descendants, but all the people who had become family through choice rather than blood. Mrs. Rodriguez, who passed peacefully in her sleep in 1905 at the age of 87, left her boarding house to Ethan and Rose in her will, acknowledging them as the children she had never had. They converted it into housing for new families arriving in Placitas, charging modest rent and using the income to support various community projects. Dr. Chen and Lily both lived into their 80s, passing within months of each other in 1907, and their loss was felt deeply throughout the community. At their funeral, Ethan spoke about how Dr. Chen's skill had saved Rose's life and by extension had made possible everything that came after. He gave us not just years, but a lifetime, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Every child born to us, every grandchild who will carry our story forward exists because of his knowledge and compassion. Thomas Crawford retired in 1910, turning his ranch over to his sons, but remaining in the area. He and Ethan maintained their friendship, two old men who would sit on porches and talk about the old days when the territory was wilder and the future more uncertain. Crawford lived to see Ethan's children grown and married, and when he died in 1915 at the age of 83, he left a portion of his estate to the Irving family in recognition of Ethan's years of dedicated service. Through all these years, all these changes and milestones, the bond between Ethan and Rose never weakened. If anything, it grew stronger with time, deepened by shared experiences, and weathered by the inevitable challenges that life presented. They faced losses together, including the death of James in 1912 from a mining accident, a tragedy that devastated Rose, but which she survived with Ethan's steady support. They celebrated triumphs together, watching with pride as their children succeeded, and their grandchildren grew. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1915, the entire family gathered for a celebration that took over the largest hall in Placitas. All three of their children were there with their spouses, along with seven grandchildren ranging in age from 4 to 14. James's widow, Patricia, came from Colorado, with her own children and grandchildren from her first marriage, the families having remained close despite the distance. Father Miguel, now nearly 90 but still sharp, stood to offer a toast. 30 years ago, I married a young couple who barely knew each other, but who loved each other with a depth that defied logic and circumstance. Many told them they were rushing into marriage, that they should wait and be sensible. But they understood something that took me many years to learn. When you find the person who makes your soul come alive, you hold on and never let go. Ethan and Rose Irving have shown this community what true partnership looks like, what commitment means when tested by time. May we all be blessed to find even a fraction of what they have found in each other. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Ethan pulled Rose close, kissing her as though they were young newlyweds rather than a couple in their 50s. "I love you," he whispered against her ear, "today, tomorrow, and every day that follows." "And I love you," Rose replied, "my rescuer, my partner, my heart." As they looked around the room at the life they had built together, at the children and grandchildren and friends who filled the space with love and laughter, both Ethan and Rose felt the profound satisfaction of a journey well traveled. The attack that had nearly ended Rose's life in the snow all those years ago had instead been the beginning of something extraordinary, a love story that would echo through generations. The years rolled on, bringing both joy and sorrow, as years inevitably do. Catherine and Michael had three children who were as adventurous as their mother, and Michael's work with the railroad brought prosperity to the family. Samuel's law practice expanded to include two junior partners, and he became known as one of the most effective attorneys in the territory, fighting for justice and fairness in an often unjust world. Thomas and Rebecca's artistic collaboration resulted in works that were displayed as far away as Denver and San Francisco, bringing recognition to Placitas as a center of craftsmanship. In 1920, when Ethan was 58 and Rose 57, they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Their grandchildren played in the yard, 11 of them now, ranging from teenagers to toddlers, and the sounds of their laughter filled the evening air. "Do you remember," Rose said thoughtfully, "that conversation we had the day you told me you loved me? When you said you would travel to the ends of the earth if it made me happy? I remember every word of every important conversation we have ever had." Ethan replied, taking her hand. "What about it?" "I just want you to know that you have done exactly that. Maybe not literally traveling to the ends of the earth, but you have given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. When I was lying in that snow, bleeding and certain I was about to die, I remember thinking that I had not really lived yet, that I was going to leave this world having experienced so little of what it had to offer." She squeezed his hand gently. "But then you appeared like something out of a dream, and you gave me not just my life, but a life worth living. You gave me love, family, purpose, joy. Everything good in my world traces back to you." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes, emotion overwhelming him as it sometimes did when Rose spoke from her heart. "You have given me just as much, more probably. You made me understand what it means to truly live, to love someone so completely that they become part of your very soul. I was just a lonely cowboy with no real direction before I found you. You gave my life meaning." "We saved each other then," Rose said softly, "and we have kept on saving each other every day since." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear their children preparing dinner, voices calling out instructions and jokes, the comfortable chaos of a large, close family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every tomorrow did, But tonight they simply sat together, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built something beautiful from a moment of terrible violence. Ethan and Rose lived to see the admission of New Mexico as the 47th state in 1912, a milestone they celebrated with pride. They witnessed the dramatic changes that the early 20th century brought to their region, from automobiles replacing horses on many roads to electricity reaching even remote communities. Through it all, they remained anchored to each other and to the values that had guided them through their years together. In 1930, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary, an occasion that brought together a family that now included 19 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. At 68 and 67 respectively, Ethan and Rose were both in remarkably good health, still active and engaged in their community. Ethan had finally retired from ranch work a few years earlier, but he kept busy managing their property and spending time with family. Rose, too, had retired from dressmaking, though she still did occasional alterations as favors for friends. The celebration was quieter than their 30th anniversary had been, just immediate family gathered at the house for dinner. But the love in that room was no less powerful for the smaller gathering. Samuel, now 42 and graying at the temples, stood to speak. "My parents have given us many gifts over the years," he said, looking at Ethan and Rose with obvious affection. "They gave us life, obviously, but more than that, they gave us an example of what it means to truly love someone. They showed us that commitment means staying together through difficulties, not just celebrating during good times. They taught us that family is not just about blood, but about choice, about deciding every day to love and support each other." He raised his glass. "To Ethan and Rose Irving, whose love story has been the foundation on which all of us have built our lives." As everyone drank to the toast, Rose wiped tears from her eyes. "I do not know what we did to deserve such wonderful children and grandchildren," she said, her voice wavering with emotion. "But I am grateful for every single one of you. You are our legacy, the best thing we have created together." Later that night, after everyone had gone home or retired to guest rooms, Ethan and Rose lay in their bed, the same one they had shared for over 4 decades. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rose asked in the darkness. "The day we met?" "Sometimes. Mostly when we visit that spot in the mountains each December." They still maintained that tradition, though the ride was harder now with aging bodies. "Why?" "I was just thinking about how much of life comes down to chance. If you had taken a different trail, if I had made different choices about where to camp, if those men had not attacked me, if their aim had been better or worse. So many tiny moments that could have changed everything. But they did not change. We found each other exactly as we were meant to." "You believe in fate, then?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "I believe that some things are meant to be, yes. Or maybe I just cannot bear to think about a world where I did not find you that day, where I continued through life without knowing what we could have together. So I choose to believe that somehow, some way, we were always going to find each other." Rose rolled over to face him, her features barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I choose to believe that too. And I choose to believe that in whatever comes next, after this life, we will find each other again." "Always," Ethan promised, pulling her close. "In this life and whatever lies beyond, you are mine and I am yours." They drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found their perfect match and had cherished that gift for 45 years. The years that followed brought the inevitable challenges of aging. Ethan developed arthritis that made his hands stiff and painful, limiting his ability to work with wood as he once had. Rose's eyesight began to fail, making reading difficult and causing her to finally give up even the occasional alterations she had continued doing. But they adapted, finding new ways to spend their time and new sources of joy in each stage of life. Their grandchildren began having children of their own, and Ethan and Rose delighted in being great-grandparents, marveling at the new generations that carried their legacy forward. They told stories to anyone who would listen, tales of the old days when Placidus was barely a village and the territory was still wild and unsettled. The younger generations listened with fascination, struggling to imagine a world so different from the one they knew. In 1935, Placitas held a celebration to honor its oldest residents, and Ethan and Rose were among those recognized. The mayor, a man young enough to be their grandson, spoke about how couples like the Irvings had built the community through their hard work and dedication. They came to this place when it was rough and unforgiving, he said, and through their efforts, through their love for each other and for this town, they helped create something lasting and beautiful. Ethan, now 73, stood with difficulty but with pride, helping Rose, 72, to her feet as well. We did not do anything special, he told the gathered crowd. We simply loved each other and tried to be good neighbors. That is all any of us can do, really. Love well, work hard, and try to leave the world a little better than we found it. The applause was thunderous, and several people wiped tears from their eyes. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached to share their own stories of how Ethan and Rose had touched their lives, kindnesses remembered, and assistance given in times of need. It was humbling and overwhelming, a reminder that a life well lived touches far more people than we ever realize. As they grew older, Ethan and Rose spoke more frequently about death, no longer shying away from the reality that their time together was finite. They made plans, ensuring that their affairs were in order and that their children would not face unnecessary complications when the inevitable came. But even as they acknowledged their mortality, they refused to live as though they were dying. "We still have time," Rose would say when Ethan grew melancholy, "and we are going to use every bit of it." They did use it, filling their remaining years with as much living as their aging bodies would allow. They attended every family gathering, every grandchild's graduation and wedding, every great-grandchild's birthday party. They maintained their December tradition of visiting the place where they met, though eventually they had to settle for riding in a wagon driven by one of their children rather than making the journey on horseback. In December of 1939, 55 years after the day Ethan had found Rose bleeding in the snow, they made what would be their final trip to that sacred spot. Ethan was now 77, Rose 76, and both were visibly frail despite their determination to maintain this tradition. Samuel drove them in his automobile, a modern convenience that still amazed Ethan despite having seen such vehicles for over 20 years now. They stood together at the spot, holding hands, looking at the pine trees that had witnessed the beginning of their story. Snow fell gently around them, just as it had on that long-ago day, and for a moment time seemed to collapse. Ethan could almost see the young woman lying there, could feel the terror and determination that had driven him to act. "Thank you," Rose said softly, her voice carrying despite its weakness. "For everything, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me a life beyond anything I dared dream." "Thank you for letting me love you," Ethan replied, "for choosing me, for building this life with me, for 55 years of happiness." They stood there until the cold forced them back to the warmth of Samuel's automobile, but the peace they felt was profound. They had come full circle from the beginning of their story to what they both sensed was near its end, and they could look back with satisfaction and gratitude. Ethan passed away in his sleep on a February morning in 1940, his hand still holding Rose's, as it had through 55 years of marriage. He was 77 years old, and his death, while sad, felt somehow right, a natural conclusion to a life fully lived. The funeral drew hundreds of people from throughout the region, all coming to pay respects to a man who had touched so many lives through his quiet kindness and unwavering integrity. Rose grieved but did not shatter. She had known this day would come, had prepared herself as much as anyone can prepare for the loss of their other half. She lived for another year, spending her time with family and friends, sharing stories of Ethan and keeping his memory alive. She spoke often of their first meeting, of how he had pressed his hands to her wound and refused to let her die, of how that moment had changed everything. "He saved my life in that snow," she would say. "But more than that, he gave me a reason to want to live. He showed me what love looks like, what it means to commit yourself fully to another person. I have been blessed beyond measure. Rose Irving passed away peacefully in March of 1941, just over a year after Ethan's death. She was 77, the same age Ethan had been, and her children found her in her bed with a smile on her face, as though she had seen something wonderful in her final moments. On her bedside table was a photograph from their wedding day, two young people looking at each other with joy and promise. They were buried side by side in the Placidus Cemetery, their headstones bearing simple inscriptions. Ethan Michael Irving, 1862, 1940. Beloved husband, father, and friend. Rose Catherine Irving, 1863, 1941. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. Below both names added by their children was a single line. Their love story began in snow and blood and bloomed into something beautiful. The Irving family continued to grow and flourish, carrying forward the values and love that Ethan and Rose had instilled in them. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren spread throughout New Mexico and beyond, each carrying a piece of the story that had started on a cold December morning when a cowboy found a dying woman and chose to save her. The house they had built together remained in the family for generations, each new owner adding their own chapter to its story, but always remembering and honoring the couple who had established its foundation. The small plot where they had lived and loved became almost a shrine, a place where family members would gather to remember and celebrate the extraordinary, ordinary love of Ethan and Rose Irving. In later years, someone in the family compiled all the stories, all the letters and photographs and memories into a book that was shared among the descendants. It told the complete tale, from that terrible December morning through 55 years of marriage to the peaceful endings that came to them both. But the core of the story, the heart of it, was always the same: a cowboy who refused to let a stranger die, and the love that grew from that single act of compassion. The book ended with a passage Rose had written years earlier, found among her papers after her death. People often say that love at first sight is a fantasy, that real love takes time to develop. But I fell in love with Ethan in the moment he pressed his hands to my wound and told me not to dare give up. In that instant, bleeding in the snow and certain I was dying, I looked into his eyes and saw everything I had been missing in my life. He was my rescuer, yes, but more than that, he was my future. Every day of our 55 years together has confirmed what I knew in that first moment, that some souls are meant to find each other, and when they do, magic happens. Our story began with violence and blood, but it transformed into something beautiful because we chose every single day to love each other well. That is my legacy, my gift to our children and their children after them. Love well, love deeply, and never take a single moment for granted. Life is precious and fragile and miraculous all at once. Those words became a touchstone for the Irving family, repeated at weddings and celebrations, passed down through generations as a reminder of what Ethan and Rose had built and what they had taught through their example. Their love story became legendary in Placidus and beyond, the tale of the cowboy and the woman in the snow, of how a single moment of compassion and courage had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in a very real sense, they never truly left. Their spirits lingered in the house they had built, in the land they had loved, in the hearts of every person who had been touched by their kindness. Every December, members of the Irving family would make a pilgrimage to that spot in the mountains where it all began, standing where Ethan had found Rose, remembering and honoring the love that had started there. The pine trees still stood, older and taller now, silent witnesses to a love story that had transformed not just two lives, but an entire community. And sometimes, on quiet winter mornings when snow fell softly through the branches, it was easy to imagine that you could still feel their presence there, still sense the miracle of connection that had occurred on that spot so many years ago. Ethan and Rose Irving's story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic adventures, though it certainly began with drama. Instead, it was a story of steady, enduring love, of two people who found each other against impossible odds and chose every single day for 55 years to honor that gift. They faced challenges and celebrated triumphs. They raised children and built a community. They aged together and faced death with the same courage they had faced life. Theirs was a love story for the ages, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering commitment. It survived hardship and flourished in joy. It created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives, touching generations of people who would never know them directly, but who would benefit from the example they set. In the end, that is perhaps the greatest legacy anyone can leave. Not wealth or fame, but the knowledge that they loved well and were well loved in return. Ethan and Rose Irving achieved that and more, their story a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and committed love. They proved that from the worst moments can come the greatest blessings, and that sometimes the simple act of refusing to give up on another person can change not just their life, but the lives of countless others yet to come.